The air itself seemed to hold its breath around it, not with the chill of a tomb, but with the heavy, humid silence of a secret too long kept, too deeply buried beneath the sun-baked soil of Mississippi. It was a door unlike any other on Harrow Hill, the sprawling cotton plantation that clung to the banks of a sluggish, serpentine tributary of the great river. A door of ancient, dark oak, its surface weathered to a near-black sheen, reinforced with bands of tarnished iron that seemed to grip the wood like skeletal fingers. It was set into the foundation of the main house, a grand, imposing structure that overlooked acres of verdant, then dusty, then snow-white fields. This door, however, faced away from the fields, tucked into a shadowed alcove at the rear of the house, almost swallowed by the dense, overgrown jasmine and climbing roses that fought a losing battle against the encroaching kudzu. No window overlooked it, no path led directly to it. It simply was, and it was locked, always. The rule surrounding it was not written, not spoken in harsh tones, nor even whispered in hushed warnings. It was simply understood, absorbed into the very fabric of life at Harrow Hill, like the relentless heat of summer or the pervasive scent of cotton and river mud. No worker, no matter their station, was ever permitted to approach it. No overseer, no matter how loyal, was ever seen to linger near it. Even the domestic staff, whose duties brought them into the very bowels of the house, would avert their gaze, their steps quickening, their hands tightening on their baskets or brooms whenever they passed its general vicinity. The punishment for violating this unspoken decree was not a public lashing, not a reduction in rations, not even a stern reprimand. It was something far more insidious, far more effective. A worker found too close to that door would simply disappear, not in a dramatic, violent fashion that would incite rebellion or even open questioning. No, their absence would be explained away with a quiet, almost regretful tone. Moved on to another plantation, or taken ill, passed in the night. The vagueness, the lack of detail, the immediate cessation of any further discussion was the true terror. It taught a lesson more profound than any whip. Some questions were not merely dangerous to ask, but dangerous even to think. And so, over the years, the workers of Harrow Hill learned. They learned to erase the door from their peripheral vision, to silence the nascent curiosity in their minds, to train their bodies to move around it as if it were a void, a place where light and sound simply ceased to exist. It became a blind spot in the collective consciousness of the plantation, a silent, heavy presence that shaped their movements and their thoughts without ever demanding direct attention. It was the ultimate testament to control, a monument to an unspoken dread that permeated every corner of Harrow Hill, from the grand parlor to the furthest reaches of the cotton fields. What could be behind such a door? What secret could command such absolute terrifying obedience, not through overt threat, but through the chilling power of implication and absence? The very thought was a dangerous luxury, a spark that could ignite a conflagration of fear and suspicion. But for those who lived under its shadow, the question, though unasked, hung heavy in the humid air, a silent, suffocating weight. It is a question that has echoed through the forgotten corners of history, a whisper of a truth that refuses to be entirely silenced. And if you find yourself drawn into the shadows of such tales, where the past holds secrets that still chill the blood, consider joining our growing community. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, and let us uncover these forgotten histories together. Harrow Hill was not merely a plantation. It was a meticulously constructed empire, carved from the rich alluvial soil of Mississippi. Its very name, chosen by its proprietor, Elias Vane, hinted at the arduous labor and the relentless ambition that had shaped it. The main house, a formidable structure of red brick and white columns, stood atop a gentle rise, commanding a panoramic view of the fields that stretched to the horizon, a testament to Elias's vision and his unyielding will. Below, the tributary, sluggish and murky, wound its way through cypress knees and Spanish moss, a constant, almost imperceptible murmur that was the only true sound of nature allowed to persist unchallenged on the estate. The year was 1846. The air, even in the early spring, was thick with the promise of summer's oppressive heat, a palpable humidity that clung to the skin and made every breath a conscious effort. The scent of blooming jasmine mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, the faint, sweet, sickly smell of molasses from the kitchen, and the ever-present underlying tang of human sweat and exertion. Life on Harrow Hill moved with a rhythm as predictable and unyielding as the turning of the seasons. From the first grey light of dawn until the last ember faded in the quarters, every soul had a purpose, every movement was observed, every deviation noted. Elias Vane, the architect of this domain, was a man forged in the crucible of ambition. He had arrived in Mississippi in 1831, a man in his mid-30s, having left behind the more established, if less lucrative, lands of Virginia. He carried with him a modest inheritance, a sharp mind, and an almost preternatural ability to discern opportunity where others saw only wilderness. He was not a man of grand gestures or fiery pronouncements. His power lay in his quiet intensity, his methodical approach to every transaction, every decision. His eyes, a pale, almost colorless blue, seemed to absorb every detail, missing nothing, betraying no emotion. He was, by the standards of his era, not overtly cruel. He did not indulge in the casual brutalities that marked some of his peers. Instead, his cruelty was of a more refined, more chilling variety. The cold, calculating efficiency of a man who viewed human beings as assets, to be managed, utilized, and, if necessary, disposed of with the same dispassionate logic applied to a failing crop or a worn-out tool. His reputation in Natchez, the bustling, opulent river town that served as the social and economic hub of the region, was one of quiet success. He was respected, if not particularly liked. His wealth grew steadily, his cotton yields were consistently high, and his affairs were always in impeccable order. He attended church regularly, contributed generously to local charities, and hosted the requisite social gatherings. Though his demeanor remained distant, his conversations clipped and precise. He was a pillar of the community, a testament to the self-made man, and beneath the veneer of southern gentility, a predator of the most dangerous kind. One who operated entirely within the bounds of the law, bending it, shaping it, but never overtly breaking it. Nora Vane, his wife, was a woman who had once possessed a vibrant spirit, now muted by years of quiet endurance. She had come from a respected Natchez family, the Duprees, and had married Elias at the tender age of 19. 27 years had passed since then, years spent watching her husband transform from a driven young man into something she could not fully name, something that filled her with a cold, persistent dread. Her days were a carefully choreographed performance of normalcy, managing the household, overseeing the domestic staff, hosting guests, maintaining the delicate social balance required of a plantation mistress. Her hands, once soft, were now perpetually clasped, her knuckles white, as if holding onto a fragile thread of sanity. Her eyes, once bright, now held a haunted, distant quality, reflecting a landscape of internal unease. She was not innocent of the system that sustained her life. She benefited from it, was complicit in it by her very existence within it. But she was also a prisoner, bound by the rigid strictures of her time, by the laws that rendered her husband her legal master, by the social expectations that demanded her silence and her unwavering support. She moved through the grand rooms of Harrow Hill like a ghost, her silk dresses rustling softly, her presence a mere echo in the vast, silent house. She performed her duties with a meticulousness that mirrored Elias's own, a desperate attempt to maintain order in a world that felt increasingly chaotic and terrifying beneath its polished surface. She was afraid, not just of Elias, but of the nameless thing that had taken root in their lives, a thing that manifested most acutely in the heavy, silent presence of that locked door. The community of Natchez, with its grand mansions and bustling riverfront, its balls and its church socials, formed the outer layer of this carefully constructed world. It was a web of interconnected families, of shared interests and unspoken understandings. Visitors came and went from Harrow Hill, their carriages kicking up dust on the long drive, their laughter echoing briefly through the halls. They spoke of cotton prices, of politics, of the latest fashions from New Orleans. They spoke of everything and nothing, carefully avoiding the deeper currents that ran beneath the surface of their polite society. The church, a stately edifice in town, offered solace and sermons, reinforcing the established order, providing a moral framework that, for men like Elias, conveniently justified their actions and absolved their consciences. In this world, silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was a language, a tool of control, a shield behind which unspeakable truths could fester and grow. The locked door was the ultimate symbol of this silence, a physical manifestation of the unspoken, the unacknowledged, the terrifyingly real. It was a constant, oppressive presence, a monument to the things that were not to be seen, not to be heard, not to be questioned. And in the suffocating heat of that Mississippi spring, the stage was set for a quiet unraveling, a slow, inexorable descent into the heart of Harrow Hill's darkest secret. The wagon that brought Henry to Harrow Hill was old and creaking, its wheels groaning under the weight of a few meager possessions and the oppressive weight of a new beginning. He had come from a plantation near Vicksburg, one that had fallen into disarray after its owner, a man named Fitzwilliam, had succumbed to a sudden fever, leaving behind a mountain of debts and no clear heir. The estate had been dissolved, its assets, including its enslaved population, dispersed to various buyers across the region. Henry, a young man of 22, had found himself part of a small group purchased by Elias Vane. Henry was not like the others in his group. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but his silence was not born of dullness or resignation. It was the silence of a keen observer, a mind constantly at work, processing every detail, every nuance of his new surroundings. His eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. He moved with a careful, almost deliberate grace, his body lean and strong from years of labor, but his spirit held a spark of something untamed, a quiet curiosity that had not yet been extinguished by the harsh realities of his life. He had learned early on that in a world where one's very existence was dictated by others, the ability to see without being seen, to hear without being heard, was a powerful, if subtle, form of resistance. His first days at Harrow Hill were a blur of new faces, new routines, and the overwhelming sense of being an outsider. The work was hard, as it always was, but there was an almost military precision to the operations here that he hadn't encountered before. The fields were meticulously tended, the tools kept in perfect order, the overseers efficient and watchful. He learned the names of the other workers, the layout of the quarters, the rhythm of the bells that marked the day's beginning and end. He learned to blend in, to become another face in the crowd, while his mind catalogued every detail. It was on his second day, while carrying a heavy sack of cornmeal from the storeroom to the kitchen, that he first saw it. The door. He had taken a shortcut, a path less traveled by the other workers, hoping to avoid the midday sun for a few extra moments. And there it was, tucked into the shadowed alcove, partially obscured by the rampant jasmine. It was just a door at first glance, old, heavy, locked. But something about it snagged his attention. Perhaps it was the way the light seemed to shy away from it, or the unnatural stillness of the air around it. He paused, his muscles straining under the weight of the sack, his gaze fixed on the dark wood. He felt a prickle of unease, a subtle warning that resonated deep within him. He had seen many locked doors in his life, storerooms, smokehouses, the master's private study. But this one felt different. It exuded an aura of absolute finality, a sense of something not merely secured, but utterly sealed away. As he continued his journey, he began to observe. He noticed that no one mentioned it, not in passing, not in complaint, not even in idle gossip. It was as if the door simply did not exist in their collective vocabulary. He saw an older woman, her back bent with years of labor, carrying a pail of water. Her path would take her within yards of the door, but her eyes remained fixed straight ahead. her pace quickening almost imperceptibly as she passed. He saw a young boy, chasing a stray chicken, veer sharply away from the alcove, as if an invisible barrier stood in his path. Then he noticed Ruth. She was an older woman, her face a road map of lines etched by sun and sorrow, her movements slow but deliberate. She had been at Harrow Hill, he learned, since its very inception, a silent fixture in the domestic staff. One afternoon, he saw her emerge from the main house carrying a basket of laundry. Her path led her past the rear of the house, and for a fleeting moment her gaze flickered towards the alcove. It was not a look of curiosity, or even fear, but something far more profound, a deep, weary sorrow, a profound resignation. Her eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to hold a universe of unspoken stories. Then, just as quickly, her gaze shifted, her face became a mask, and she continued on her way, her steps heavy. He also noticed Augustus Lyle, the head overseer. Lyle was a man of imposing stature, with a stern countenance and a reputation for unwavering loyalty to Elias Vane. He moved with an air of authority, his presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Henry observed that whenever Lyle was near the main house, particularly in the vicinity of the rear entrance, his posture would subtly change. His shoulders would square, his jaw would tighten, and his eyes would sweep the area with an almost predatory vigilance, as if guarding an invisible perimeter. It was a subtle shift, one that most would miss, but Henry, with his heightened senses, registered it immediately. Lyle wasn't just patrolling, he was protecting. The more Henry observed, the more the door became a focal point of his quiet investigations. It was a silent challenge, a puzzle that demanded to be solved. He understood instinctively that the answers it held were dangerous, perhaps even deadly, but the very intensity of the silence surrounding it, the almost ritualistic avoidance practiced by everyone on the plantation, only fueled his quiet determination. He began to observe the house itself, the patterns of movement, the comings and goings, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. He was a new set of eyes, unburdened by years of conditioned fear. And what he saw, what he felt, was a growing certainty that behind that locked door lay not just a secret, but a living, breathing truth that Harrow Hill had desperately tried to bury. The night air of late spring in Mississippi was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the scent of damp earth and the incessant chorus of cicadas. It was a night when sleep came fitfully, if at all, even for those exhausted by a day of relentless labor. Henry, lying on his thin pallet in the crowded quarters, found himself restless. The heat was oppressive, pressing down on him, and the low murmurs of his fellow workers, some stirring in their sleep, others, simply unable to find it, did little to soothe his unease. His mind, ever active, replayed the day's observations, particularly the silent dance around the locked door. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others. A sliver of moonlight filtered through the cracks in the rough-hewn wall of the cabin, illuminated the dusty floor. He moved to the small, almost imperceptible gap in the wall, a knothole that offered a narrow, distorted view of the main house's rear. It was a habit he had developed, a way to observe the world beyond his immediate confines, to understand the rhythms of the master's house, the movements of those who held power. He had been watching for perhaps an hour, the world outside bathed in the pale silver glow of the moon, when he saw it. A carriage, its wheels muffled by the soft earth of the drive, approached the house not from the main entrance, but from a less used track that wound through a copse of live oaks. It was a dark, unassuming vehicle, without the usual ornate flourishes of a visitor's conveyance. It stopped some distance from the house, its horses snorting softly in the stillness. A figure emerged from the carriage, a man of medium height, dressed in dark, formal attire. Even from a distance, Henry could discern the precise, almost clinical way he moved. This was Dr. Warren Speck, the physician from Natchez, whose visits were usually announced, his presence a sign of illness or birth. But this visit was different. There was no urgency, no frantic summons, only a quiet, almost clandestine arrival. Augustus Lyle, The head overseer, materialized from the shadows of the house, moving with a swiftness that belied his bulk. He met Dr. Speck at the carriage, a brief, almost imperceptible exchange of nods passing between them. There were no words, no greetings. It was a silent, pre-arranged rendezvous. Lyle then led Dr. Speck not to the main entrance nor to the side door used by tradesmen, but directly towards the rear of the house, towards the very alcove where the locked door resided. Henry's breath hitched in his throat. He pressed his eye closer to the knothole, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He watched as Lyle produced a key, a large, heavy-looking key that glinted briefly in the moonlight, and inserted it into the lock of the dark oak door. The sound, though distant, was distinct, a heavy metallic click, followed by the deep, resonant creak of ancient hinges as the door swung inward, revealing a cavernous darkness beyond. Dr. Speck disappeared into the black maw, followed by Lyle, who then pulled the door shut behind them, plunging the alcove back into its accustomed shadow. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant croaking of frogs from the river. Henry remained frozen, his eye glued to the gap, his mind racing. What were they doing in there? Why the secrecy? Why the dead of night? Minutes stretched into an eternity. Henry strained his ears, trying to discern any sound from within the house. He heard nothing for a long while, only the thrumming of his own blood in his ears. Then, faint, muffled, almost imperceptible, he heard it. Not a scream, not a cry of pain, nothing so dramatic. It was a series of indistinct sounds, a low, rhythmic thudding, followed by a soft, almost mechanical clinking, like instruments being moved or adjusted. Then a deeper, almost guttural sigh, quickly stifled. It was not human speech, not a struggle, but something far more unsettling in its ambiguity. It was the sound of work being done, of a process unfolding cold and methodical in the absolute darkness. The sounds continued for what felt like an hour, a chilling symphony of the unknown. Then, as abruptly as they had begun, they ceased. Another stretch of silence, even more profound than before. Finally, the heavy oak door creaked open again. Lyle emerged first, his face unreadable in the moonlight, followed by Dr. Speck, who carried a small, dark satchel. They exchanged another brief, silent nod. Lyle relocked the door with the same heavy key, the click echoing faintly in the night. Dr. Speck returned to his carriage, his movements still precise, his demeanor unchanged. He climbed in, and the carriage, without a word or a backward glance, turned and disappeared back down the winding track, swallowed by the darkness of the live oaks. Lyle remained for a moment, his gaze sweeping the area, before melting back into the shadows of the house. Henry remained at the knothole long after they were gone, his body trembling, his mind reeling. He had witnessed something profoundly disturbing, something that defied easy explanation. The sounds, the secrecy, the doctor's presence, the locked door. It all coalesced into a chilling tableau of hidden activity. In the morning, the world of Harrow Hill seemed to have reset itself. The sun rose, painting the fields in hues of gold and green. The bells rang, calling everyone to work. The air was thick with the usual sounds of the plantation, the distant shouts of overseers, the rhythmic thud of hoes in the soil, the lowing of cattle. Everything looked the same. But for Henry, something had irrevocably shifted. The locked door was no longer just a symbol of unspoken fear. It was a gateway to a tangible, terrifying reality. He had heard the sounds of what lay beyond, and the memory of them, indistinct yet deeply unsettling, would forever haunt his waking hours. The world, he realized, was full of such hidden truths, secrets that festered beneath the surface of polite society, waiting for an unsuspecting eye to glimpse them. And if you're drawn to the unsettling nature of such concealed histories, where the truth is often more terrifying than any fiction, remember to like this video and share it with those who appreciate a good mystery. It helps us bring more of these forgotten tales to light. Henry knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could not speak of what he had witnessed. The memory of the disappearing workers, the vague explanations, the chilling silence that followed, was a potent deterrent. But the knowledge festered within him, a burning ember that demanded understanding. His gaze, once merely observant, now carried a new intensity, a quiet desperation to piece together the fragments of truth. He turned his attention to Ruth, her weary eyes, her profound sorrow, her long history on Harrow Hill. She was the key, he instinctively felt. But approaching her required a delicate touch, a patience that bordered on reverence. Ruth was a woman who had learned the hard lessons of survival in a brutal world. Trust was a luxury she could ill afford, and words she knew could be weapons. Henry began subtly. He would offer to carry her heavy baskets, to help with the more arduous tasks in the kitchen or laundry. He would listen, truly listen, when she spoke of the day's chores, of the weather, of the small, mundane details of plantation life. He never pressed, never questioned directly. He simply offered a quiet presence, a steady pair of hands, and an unspoken understanding that he saw her, truly saw her, beyond her station. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragile bridge of trust began to form between them. Ruth, initially wary, began to respond to his quiet kindness. She would offer him a small, knowing smile, a shared glance that spoke volumes. One sweltering afternoon, while they were both shelling peas on the back porch, away from the immediate earshot of the house, Ruth finally spoke of something beyond the mundane. "This place," she began, her voice a low murmur, barely audible above the drone of insects. It got its own kind of hunger, not for food, not for water, for quiet. She paused, her gnarled fingers working rhythmically on a pea pod. And for forgetting. Henry kept his gaze on his own hands, shelling peas, but his entire being was focused on her words. "Forgetting what, Ruth?" he asked, his voice equally soft, almost a whisper. Ruth sighed, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. Things that ain't supposed to be remembered, people that ain't supposed to be gone. She looked up then, her eyes meeting his, and in their depths, Henry saw a profound, ancient sorrow. "You got new eyes, boy. You see things others done learned to look away from." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement. "I saw the doctor, Ruth, that night, and Mr. Lyle and the door." Ruth's face remained impassive, but her hands stilled. "You saw too much, Henry. That door, it ain't just wood and iron, it's a promise of silence." He waited, patiently, for her to continue. He knew better than to rush her. "There was a man," she began, her voice dropping even lower, "named Cyrus. Strong man, good with horses. Came here around 39, I reckon. Good worker. One day he got sick. A fever, they said. Master Vane, he sent for the doctor, not Spec back then, another one. Doctor came, looked at him, said he was bad, real bad. Next day they said Cyrus passed in the night. Buried him out by the old oak, they said. But I never saw no burial, no coffin. Just gone." Henry felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Gone where, Ruth?" Ruth shook her head slowly. "That's the thing, ain't it? Nobody ever really knew. Just gone. And then, a few weeks later, Master Vane, he got a new horse. A fine stallion, strong and fast. Said he traded for it. But that horse, it had a way of looking at you, a way of moving, that reminded me of Cyrus. Strong, proud, and then it was gone too a few months later. Sold off, they said." She looked at Henry, her eyes piercing. But the way Master Vane talked about that horse, like it was a thing he owned, a thing he could use up and then get rid of, it was the same way he talked about Cyrus before he was gone. The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken, yet terrifyingly clear. Cyrus hadn't died. He had been traded, disposed of. "And then there was Della," Ruth continued, her voice now a mere whisper, as if the very act of speaking her name was a transgression. "Sweet girl, Della. Good with the children, always singing. Round 43, she started getting thin, coughing. Master Vane, he said she had the consumption. Sent for Dr. Speck that time. Spec came, stayed a long time in the house. Said Della was fading fast. Next thing we know, they say Della passed. Buried her next to Cyrus, they said. But again, no burial, no coffin. Just gone. Ruth's gaze drifted towards the main house, towards the hidden alcove. But Della, she had a little wooden bird she carved. Always carried it with her, said it was her mama's. After she was gone, I saw it, on Master Vane's desk, just for a day or two. Then it was gone too, like it was never there. Henry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the humid air. The pieces were beginning to fit, forming a mosaic of unspeakable horror. The falsified death records, the clandestine visits from the doctor, the disappearances. It wasn't death that was behind the locked door. It was something far more calculated, far more insidious. It was the systematic erasure of human beings, their lives reduced to transactions, their existence made to vanish as if they had never been. "They ain't dead, are they, Ruth?" Henry asked, his voice barely a breath. Ruth didn't answer directly. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "That door, Henry," she said, her voice regaining a touch of its usual weariness. "It ain't for keeping things out, it's for keeping things in, and for making sure nobody ever asks what's inside." She picked up another pea pod, her fingers resuming their rhythmic work. "You got new eyes, boy, but sometimes it's safer to be blind." Her words were a warning, a plea, and a confirmation all at once. Henry understood. The locked door was not a tomb, but a portal through which lives were made to disappear, their identities stripped away, their very existence erased from the records, only to reappear elsewhere under different circumstances for different masters. The horror was not in the supernatural, but in the cold, methodical efficiency of human cruelty, sanctioned by a system that valued property above all else. Ruth had not told him everything, she could not. But she had told him enough. Enough to confirm his darkest suspicions, enough to ignite a dangerous fire within him. The spring of 1846 brought with it not only the oppressive heat and the burgeoning life of the cotton fields, but also a subtle, insidious fracturing within Nora Vane. For years, she had existed within the gilded cage of Harrow Hill. Her life a carefully constructed performance of the dutiful wife, the gracious hostess, the mistress of a grand estate. Her silence had been her shield, her complicity a bitter pill swallowed daily, justified by the belief that knowing less was survival, that ignorance was a form of protection. She had built walls around her heart, around her mind, to keep out the creeping dread that emanated from her husband, from the very foundations of their home. But something had shifted. The walls, meticulously maintained for nearly 3 decades, were beginning to crumble, not with a sudden crash, but with the slow, agonizing erosion of a dam under relentless pressure. It began subtly, with a heightened sensitivity to the pervasive silence of the house, a silence that now felt less like peace and more like a suffocating shroud. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant murmur from the quarters, every rustle of leaves outside her window seemed to carry a hidden meaning, a whispered accusation. The catalyst, when it came, was not a single dramatic event, but a convergence of small, seemingly innocuous details that, when pieced together, formed a mosaic of undeniable horror. It started with a letter. Elias, meticulous in all things, usually kept his correspondence locked away in his study. But one afternoon, a gust of wind entering through an open window in the library where he had been working had dislodged a stack of papers from his desk, scattering them across the polished floor. Nora, passing by, had stooped to collect them, her movements automatic, her mind elsewhere. Among the papers, she saw it. A letter, not addressed to her, but clearly meant for Elias. Its seal broken. Her eyes, drawn by a morbid curiosity she could not suppress, had skimmed a few lines before her conscious mind could register the transgression. The words were cold, bureaucratic, yet they burned themselves into her memory. "To, the arrangement for the 3 units from your last shipment has been finalized. Dr. Sinclair reports excellent health and full compliance. Payment, as agreed, has been deposited. We anticipate similar opportunities next quarter, pending your usual discretion regarding documentation. 3 units. Shipment. Documentation. The words, stripped of their human context, were chilling in their implication. They spoke of commodities, of transactions, of a deliberate obfuscation of truth. Nora's hands trembled, and she quickly gathered the papers, placing the letter back on the stack, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was merely business, a common practice in the complex world of plantation economics. But the cold dread that settled in her stomach refused to dissipate. Then, a few weeks later, she overheard a conversation. It was late evening, and Elias and Dr. Speck were in the study, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. Nora, unable to sleep, had descended the grand staircase for a glass of water, her bare feet silent on the Persian rugs. As she passed the study door, slightly ajar, fragments of their hushed exchange drifted into the hallway. The fever was convincing enough, Elias. The records are quite clear. No one will question it. That was Speck's voice, smooth and unctuous. Then Elias's colder, sharper. And the other matter? The one from 43? Are we certain there are no lingering threads? Absolutely, my dear Vane. The new identity is firmly established. A clean slate, as it were. A new life, far from here. No one would ever connect the two. The consumption diagnosis was quite effective in ensuring a swift, unquestioned departure. Nora froze, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles ached. The one from 43. Della. Ruth's words, whispered in hushed tones, echoed in her mind. Sweet girl Della. Said she had the consumption just gone. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The fever for Cyrus, the consumption for Della, the documentation, the shipment, the new identity. The full shape of what she had been living inside for years, what Elias had been doing, began to coalesce into a monstrous, undeniable truth. It was not merely the buying and selling of human beings, a practice she had long accepted as the brutal reality of her world. It was something far more sinister. The deliberate, systematic erasure of lives, the creation of false deaths, the trafficking of legally dead people into new forms of bondage, all for profit, all under the cloak of medical authority and meticulous record-keeping. Nora felt a profound, internal scream rise within her, trapped behind the carefully constructed facade of her composure. Her world, once merely uncomfortable, now felt like a charnel house, built on lies and stolen lives. She was not a villain, not in the overt sense. She had never raised a hand in anger, never directly participated in the cruelties. But she was not a hero either. She was a woman of her era, trapped by the ironclad laws that bound her to her husband, by the social architecture that rendered her invisible in matters of business, yet accountable for the smooth running of her household. Her wealth, her status, her very existence were inextricably linked to Elias's enterprise. The realization was devastating. She had been complicit, not just through her silence, but through her very presence, her acceptance of the life Elias provided. The grand house, the fine clothes, the social standing, all of it was tainted, built upon the deliberate disappearance of human beings. Her fear, once a vague, shapeless dread, now had a name, a face, a chilling methodology. She saw Elias not as her husband, but as a meticulous butcher, carving up lives with the precision of a surgeon, all for the sake of profit and power. Her nights became sleepless torments, her days a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation, her mind constantly replaying the overheard words, the chilling phrases from the letter. She looked at the faces of the enslaved workers, seeing not just their labor, but their vulnerability, their potential for erasure. She looked at Elias, seeing a stranger, a monster cloaked in respectability. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a woman trapped, complicit and utterly terrified. The fracture was complete. The dam had broken. And Nora Vane, for the first time in years, began to contemplate a future that lay beyond the suffocating confines of Harrow Hill, a future that might require an act of desperate, terrifying courage. The atmosphere at Harrow Hill, already thick with the humid heat of summer, grew heavy with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of unease that settled over the plantation like a storm cloud. Henry, now burdened with Ruth's fragmented truths and his own chilling observations, found himself moving through the days with a heightened sense of awareness, every nerve alert, every shadow a potential threat. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the knowledge he possessed, the terrible implications of the locked door, had ignited a fire within him that he could not extinguish. His quiet investigation continued, now with a desperate urgency. He searched for clues, for anything that might corroborate Ruth's stories, anything that might shed more light on the dark dealings behind the oak door. His opportunity came unexpectedly, during a sweltering afternoon spent clearing brush near the old woodpile, a neglected corner of the estate where discarded items often found their final resting place. As he pulled away a tangle of thorny vines, his hand brushed against something stiff, half buried in the damp earth. He dug it out carefully, his heart quickening. It was a piece of paper, crumpled and stained with mud, and what looked like dried blood, but still legible in parts. It was a partial record, a fragment of a ledger page, torn and discarded. His eyes scanned the faded ink. Cyrus, 1841. Fever. Transferred. Montgomery Plantation, Louisiana. 300. Della, 1843. Consumption. Reassigned. Caldwell Estate, Alabama. 250. Elias Vane. Payment received. Dr. Speck. Services rendered. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Transferred. Reassigned. Payment received. It was all there, in stark, cold print. The names Ruth had whispered, the dates, the false diagnoses, the destinations. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was documented, a chilling testament to the methodical nature of Elias Vane's enterprise. The numbers, he realized, were not ages, but prices. The services rendered by Dr. Speck were not for healing, but for facilitating these monstrous transactions. Henry quickly folded the document, tucking it deep into his worn trousers, his hands trembling. He had found his proof, but it was a proof that felt like a death warrant. He knew instinctively that this piece of paper was incredibly dangerous, a direct link to the unspeakable. His changed behavior, subtle as it was, did not go unnoticed. Augustus Lyle, the head overseer, was a man whose loyalty to Elias Vane was absolute, forged in a past that Elias held like a key, a secret leverage that ensured Lyle's unwavering obedience. Lyle had a keen eye for deviation, a finely tuned sense for anything that disrupted the carefully maintained order of Harrow Hill. He had observed Henry from the moment he arrived, noting his quiet intelligence, his observant nature. Now, he saw a new intensity in the young man's eyes, a restlessness in his movements, a subtle shift in his demeanor that spoke of a mind troubled by more than just the day's labor. Lyle began to watch Henry more closely. He would appear unexpectedly in the fields where Henry worked, his presence a silent, imposing question. He would ask seemingly innocuous questions, his gaze piercing, searching for any flicker of discomfort, any telltale sign. "You settling in well, Henry? No complaints about the work?" His voice was even, but the underlying threat was palpable. Henry, ever careful, would respond with polite deference, his face a mask of weary compliance, but he felt Lyle's eyes on him, a constant, chilling pressure. Elias Vane, ever calculating, also began to notice. He had a network of informants, a web of eyes and ears that reported every whisper, every perceived transgression. Lyle's subtle reports, combined with Elias's own observations of Henry's quiet intensity, raised a red flag. Elias did not confront, he observed. He would watch Henry from the veranda, his pale blue eyes like chips of ice, dissecting the young man's movements, his interactions. He saw the way Henry's gaze would sometimes linger, almost imperceptibly, on the rear of the house, on the shadowed alcove. He saw the quiet conversations with Ruth, the shared glances. Elias Vane was a man who understood the power of information, and he recognized the dangerous spark of curiosity in Henry as a potential threat to his meticulously constructed empire. The atmosphere at Harrow Hill became suffocating. Henry felt the walls closing in, the air growing thin. He knew he was being watched, that his every move was scrutinized. The discarded document, now a heavy weight in his pocket, felt like a ticking clock. Ruth, sensing the escalating danger, sought him out one evening, her face etched with a fear he had not seen before. "Henry," she whispered, her voice urgent, her eyes wide with alarm. "You got to stop, you hear me? You got to stop looking, stop asking. They watching you. Mr. Lyle, he got eyes everywhere, and Master Vane. He don't forget nothing, he don't forgive nothing." She gripped his arm, her old fingers surprisingly strong. "Cyrus, Della, they ain't the only ones. There's others, always others. You think you can fight this? You think you can win? You just another one they can make disappear. Please, Henry, for your own sake, stop." Henry looked at her, at the genuine terror in her eyes, and his heart ached. He knew she was right. He knew the danger was immense, perhaps insurmountable, but he also knew he couldn't stop. The image of the crumpled document, the names, the cold transactions burned in his mind. The thought of Cyrus, strong and proud, transferred like a piece of livestock. Of Della, sweet and singing, reassigned like an object. He couldn't unsee what he had seen, couldn't unhear what he had heard. The injustice, the sheer dehumanization of it all, had taken root deep within him, and he found he could not simply turn away. He had to know more. He had to find a way. The locked door, once a mystery, was now a symbol of a profound evil, and Henry, against all reason, felt compelled to confront it, even if it meant his own destruction. The truth, once glimpsed, can be a heavy burden, a dangerous companion. And if you're finding yourself drawn deeper into this unsettling narrative, remember to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chilling detail as this story unfolds. The late August air hung heavy and still over Harrow Hill, a suffocating blanket of heat and humidity that promised no relief. The cicadas sang their deafening chorus, a relentless thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the old house. It was a night ripe for secrets, for actions taken under the cloak of darkness and the oppressive silence of a sleeping world. A rare convergence of circumstances had left the main house unusually quiet, almost deserted. Elias Vane, ever the meticulous businessman, had departed for Natchez 2 days prior, called away by an urgent matter concerning a large cotton shipment and a complex financial negotiation. His absence, though temporary, left a palpable void in the house, a momentary lifting of the constant, watchful pressure he exerted. Augustus Lyle, the head overseer, was also absent from his usual post near the house. A sudden torrential downpour 2 days earlier had caused a lower field, dangerously close to the tributary, to flood. The cotton crop, nearly ready for harvest, was at risk. Lyle, with a team of workers, had been tirelessly engaged in shoring up the levees, diverting water, and salvaging what they could. He would not return to the house until the crisis was averted, his attention entirely consumed by the immediate threat to the plantation's profitability. This left Nora Vane, for the first time in years, truly alone in the vast, echoing silence of the main house. The domestic staff had retired to their quarters, the last embers of the kitchen fire long since banked. The only sounds were the distant croaking of frogs, the rustle of leaves in a phantom breeze, and the frantic beating of her own heart. For 2 days, since Elias's departure, Nora had wrestled with a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. The fragments of the letter, the overheard conversation, Ruth's haunted eyes, and Henry's quiet, desperate inquiries, it had all coalesced into an unbearable weight. The walls she had built around herself had crumbled, leaving her exposed to the full, horrifying truth of her husband's enterprise. She could no longer pretend ignorance. She could no longer hide behind complicity. The locked door, once a symbol of her husband's power, had become a monument to her own moral decay, a silent accusation that echoed in every corner of her mind. Tonight, she would open it, Her hands trembled as she lit a single slender candle in her bedchamber, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. She dressed in a simple dark gown, her movements slow and deliberate, as if preparing for a sacred yet profane ritual. She moved through the silent house like a ghost, her bare feet making no sound on the cool, polished floors. The air grew heavier, colder, as she descended to the ground floor, her candle a tiny beacon against the encroaching darkness. She reached the rear of the house, the shadowed alcove where the jasmine and kudzu fought for dominance. The air here was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal smell that seemed to cling to the very stones. The heavy oak door loomed before her, darker than the surrounding shadows, its iron bands like the ribs of some ancient sleeping beast. Nora took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She reached into the pocket of Elias's discarded waistcoat, which she had found hanging in his study. A desperate, almost reckless act of defiance. Her fingers closed around a heavy, cold object. The key. The same key Augustus Lyle had used that night, glinting in the moonlight. With a trembling hand, she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff, metallic groan, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. The click that followed was deafening in the profound silence. She pushed the door inward slowly, agonizingly. The hinges shrieked, a long, drawn-out wail that seemed to tear at the fabric of the night. A wave of cold, stale air, thick with the scent of dust, old paper, and something else, something metallic and faintly organic, washed over her. The darkness beyond was absolute, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the meager light of her candle. Nora raised the candle higher, its flame struggling against the oppressive gloom. The light pierced the darkness, revealing a small, low-ceilinged room, its walls of rough-hewn stone, damp and stained. It was not a dungeon, not a torture chamber, nothing so overtly dramatic. It was a utilitarian space, meticulously organized, chilling in its cold efficiency. Against one wall stood a heavy iron-bound chest, its lid closed. On a rough wooden table in the center of the room, illuminated by her flickering candle, lay a collection of objects that made her breath catch in her throat. There were several leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with Elias's precise, elegant script. Beside them, a stack of official-looking documents, some bearing the seal of the county clerk, others the letterhead of various medical practices. A collection of medical instruments gleaming dully in the candlelight. Scalpels, forceps, syringes lay neatly arranged on a clean linen cloth. And beside them, a small, tarnished silver locket, its chain broken, its surface engraved with the single, delicate initial D. Della. But it was not these objects, chilling as they were, that truly shattered Nora. It was the other items, carefully placed on a smaller shelf, almost hidden in the shadows. A child's wooden bird, crudely carved but lovingly smoothed, its wings spread as if in flight. Ruth's words echoed in her mind. Della. She had a little wooden bird she carved, said it was her mama's. And beside it, a small, worn leather pouch tied with a faded string. Nora's trembling fingers untied it, and she poured its contents onto the table. A handful of dried, pressed wildflowers, still retaining a faint, sweet scent, and a small, intricately braided horsehair bracelet, its dark strands interwoven with a single bright red thread. Cyrus. Ruth's words again. Strong man, good with horses. The way Master Vane talked about that horse, like it was a thing he owned. These were not objects of the dead. These were objects of the living, cherished possessions, imbued with memory and love, left behind by those who had been made to disappear. They were proof, undeniable and devastating, that Cyrus and Della and countless others whose names filled the ledgers had not died. They had been erased, their lives stolen, their identities stripped away, their very humanity reduced to a transaction, a line in a ledger, a shipment to another plantation, another life of forced labor under a new false name. Nora stared at the objects, her candle flickering, casting grotesque shadows on the stone walls. The cold, stale air of the room seemed to press in on her, suffocating her. The silence was no longer merely oppressive. It was a scream, a chorus of silent accusations from the lives that had been extinguished within these walls, not by death, but by the cold, calculating hand of her husband. Her world, her carefully constructed reality, shattered into a million pieces around her. The truth, when finally revealed, was not a monster, but something far more terrifying, the meticulous, bureaucratic evil of man. The candle, now a stub, cast long, dancing shadows that distorted the small, stone-walled room, making the mundane objects within seem grotesque, imbued with a sinister life of their own. Nora Vane, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a horror that transcended mere fear, sat on the cold, damp floor, surrounded by the damning evidence of her husband's enterprise. The initial shock had given way to a chilling clarity, a terrible understanding that settled deep within her bones. She had spent hours in that room, meticulously poring over the ledgers, the correspondence, the medical documents. Elias's precise, elegant script, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock her with its cold, dispassionate efficiency. Each page was a testament to a monstrous system, a meticulously crafted web of deceit and profit. The ledgers detailed everything. Names, dates of death, fabricated illnesses, the names of the physicians who signed the false death certificates, Dr. Speck, Dr. Montgomery, Dr. Caldwell, a network of complicit medical professionals across 3 states. Then, the transfer dates, the receiving plantations, the new identities, and most chillingly, the purchase prices and resale values. Human lives reduced to columns of figures to profit margins. The correspondence confirmed the scale of the operation. Letters from men of influence, men she knew from Natchez society, from Charleston, from New Orleans. Men with respected names who spoke in coded language of shipments, units, and discrete arrangements. They were partners in this macabre trade, profiting from the systematic erasure and re-enslavement of individuals who had been declared legally dead. The system was designed to be invisible, to leave no trace, to operate entirely within the legal loopholes of property law and medical authority. A person declared dead could not testify, could not claim their past, could not be traced. They simply ceased to exist, only to be reborn as a new asset, in a new location, under a new name, their value maximized through this horrific sleight of hand. Nora's gaze fell upon the small personal items again. Della's wooden bird, Cyrus's horsehair bracelet. These were not just objects, they were anchors to stolen lives, silent witnesses to an unspeakable crime. They were the proof that at least 3 people who were declared dead at Harrow Hill between 1839 and 1845 were not dead when that door last closed. They were alive somewhere, working under false pretenses, their pasts obliterated, their families left to mourn a death that never occurred. The implications were staggering, not just for Elias, but for the entire network of powerful men involved. Exposure would mean ruin, not just financially, but socially, legally. It would unravel a carefully constructed facade of respectability, revealing the rot beneath. Nora felt a profound nausea, a wave of despair that threatened to consume her. What was she to do? The choice before her was stark, terrifying, and utterly without a clear path to righteousness. She could expose Elias. She had the ledger, the correspondence, the irrefutable proof. She could take it to the authorities, to the newspapers, to the very society that lauded her husband. But what would be the cost? Her own reputation would be irrevocably destroyed. She would be ostracized, perhaps even imprisoned as an accomplice. Her life as she knew it would cease to exist, and even if she succeeded, would justice truly be served in a world where such practices, though illegal in their specific execution, were built upon a foundation of accepted dehumanization? Would the system truly be dismantled, or would Elias simply be replaced by another more careful predator? She could destroy the evidence, burn the ledgers, shred the letters, bury the personal items. protect herself, maintain the facade of her life, and allow the monstrous enterprise to continue, unhindered. This was the path of least resistance, the path of self-preservation. It was the path she had, in essence, been walking for years, through her silence, through her complicity. But as her eyes fell upon Della's wooden bird, a flicker of something ignited within her. Not heroism, not a sudden surge of moral courage, but a cold, hard resolve, born of years of suppressed rage and a desperate need for agency. She was a woman of her era, trapped by law, by property, by the social architecture that made her invisible and accountable simultaneously. She could not change the world, but she could perhaps change her own small corner of it. Nora made her choice. It was not a choice of heroism, but of survival, with a twist that complicated every sympathy the listener might have built. She would not expose Elias to the world. The risk was too great, the outcome too uncertain, the personal cost too devastating. But she would not destroy the evidence either. Instead, she would take it, all of it. The ledgers, the correspondence, the medical documents, and the small, heartbreaking personal items. She carefully packed them into a sturdy canvas bag she found in the corner of the room, her movements now precise, methodical, mirroring Elias's own chilling efficiency. She would use this knowledge, this damning proof, not to bring down the system, but to secure her own future, to carve out a measure of freedom and safety for herself, and perhaps for a few others. She would use it as leverage, a silent, ever-present threat that would bind Elias to her, not through love or loyalty, but through fear. She would become his silent partner, his shadow, ensuring that her own needs, her own quiet acts of defiance, would be met. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find a way to subtly disrupt his monstrous enterprise from within, to make his meticulous system just a little less efficient, a little less profitable, one quiet act at a time. The locked door had revealed its secrets, and in doing so, it had transformed Nora Vane from a prisoner into a silent, dangerous player in a game she had never asked to join. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, began to filter through the cracks in the heavy oak door as Nora Vane finally emerged from the basement room. Her face was a mask of exhaustion, but her eyes, though still haunted, held a new, steely glint. The canvas bag, heavy with its damning contents, was clutched tightly in her hand. She relocked the door, the metallic click echoing with a chilling finality, and then, moving with a quiet determination, she ascended the stairs, leaving the secrets of the room to fester in the darkness once more. The fates of the characters, like the truths they carried, were not clean, nor were they delivered with the satisfying clarity of conventional justice. Elias Vane returned from Natchez 2 days later, his usual cold composure intact. He noticed nothing amiss. The house was in order, the fields were recovering from the flood, and his wife, though perhaps a little paler than usual, performed her duties with her customary quiet efficiency. He continued his meticulous management of Harrow Hill, his empire of cotton and human transactions. He never knew that his most guarded secret, the very foundation of his power, now resided not in a locked room, but in the possession of his own wife. He continued to profit, to expand, to maintain his respected facade in Natchez society, oblivious to the silent internal war being waged against him. His end, when it came many years later, was peaceful in his own bed, a testament to the enduring power of his carefully constructed lies. Nora Vane did not flee Harrow Hill, nor did she expose Elias. Instead, she became a different kind of mistress. The canvas bag, with its ledgers and letters, was hidden deep within a false bottom of her cedar chest, a constant, silent presence. She began to make subtle demands, requests that Elias, ever pragmatic, found himself unable to refuse. More comfortable quarters for certain elderly workers, better medical care for the sick, a quiet word that ensured a particular family was not separated. She never threatened, never explicitly mentioned the contents of her hidden trove. She simply presented her requests with a quiet, unyielding resolve, and Elias, sensing an unspoken shift in her demeanor, a new, unsettling strength, complied. She secured her own financial independence, subtly diverting funds, making investments in her own name, ensuring that should Elias ever falter, she would not be left destitute. She lived out her days at Harrow Hill, a woman transformed, her outward life unchanged, but her inner world a complex tapestry of quiet defiance, calculated survival, and a profound enduring sorrow for the lives she could not save, but whose stories she now carried. She became a silent guardian of the truth, a living archive of Elias's crimes, ensuring that at least one person remembered. Henry, after Ruth's warning and his own terrifying discovery, understood the immense danger he was in. He knew he could not directly challenge the system, but he also knew he could not remain silent. He carefully, meticulously copied the crucial details from the discarded document he had found, memorizing names, dates, and destinations. He then destroyed the original, burying the fragments deep in the river mud. He continued his work, his quiet observations, but now with a new purpose. He began to seek out opportunities, to learn skills, to save what little he could. 2 years later, under the cover of a moonless night, he slipped away from Harrow Hill, not in a desperate flight, but in a carefully planned escape, carrying with him not just the hope of freedom, but the dangerous knowledge of Elias Vane's enterprise. He made his way north, eventually finding work on a riverboat, his sharp mind and quiet demeanor serving him well. He never forgot the names, the faces, the stories of those who had been transferred. He carried their memory, a silent promise to bear witness, to ensure that their erasure was not absolute. Ruth continued her life at Harrow Hill, her face a little more lined, her eyes a little more weary, but with a quiet satisfaction that Henry had escaped. She knew Nora had changed, sensed the new, unspoken power that emanated from the mistress. She saw the subtle shifts, the small acts of kindness that had not been there before. She understood without needing to be told that the locked door's secrets had been disturbed, and that a quiet battle was now being fought within the very walls of the house. She continued to tend to her duties, a silent sentinel, a keeper of memories, her wisdom a quiet force in the lives of those around her. Augustus Lyle remained Elias's loyal overseer, his past still held like a key by his master. He continued to enforce the rules, to maintain order, to guard the secrets of Harrow Hill with unwavering vigilance. He never suspected Nora's knowledge, nor Henry's escape. He was a cog in the machine, a man bound by his own hidden transgressions, forever complicit in Elias's dark enterprise. Dr. Warren Speck continued his clandestine visits to Harrow Hill and other plantations, his medical expertise a convenient cloak for his true profession. He prospered, his reputation as a skilled physician growing, his network of powerful clients expanding. He was a man who understood the value of discretion, the profitability of silence, and the ease with which human lives could be manipulated for gain. The locked door, that heavy oak portal in the basement of Harrow Hill, remained. It was still locked, still avoided, still shrouded in its oppressive silence. But for those who knew, for Nora, for Henry, for Ruth, its meaning had irrevocably changed. It was no longer just a symbol of fear, but a monument to the chilling reality of human cruelty, to the meticulous bureaucratic evil that could flourish under the guise of respectability. It stood as a testament to the fact that the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural, but those who operate within the very fabric of society, leveraging its laws, its prejudices, and its silences to commit unspeakable acts. The true horror of Harrow Hill was not a ghost in the attic, but the cold, calculated erasure of human lives, a secret buried not in the earth, but in ledgers and in the hearts of those who dared to look. And sometimes, the most haunting stories are not those of specters and shadows, but of the very real darkness that resides within humanity itself, a darkness that, even now, whispers from the forgotten corners of history. If this tale has stirred something within you, if it has made you question the hidden truths of our past, then perhaps you'll consider sharing it with others who appreciate the chilling power of a story well told. It helps us continue to explore these unsettling narratives, ensuring that such echoes from the past are never truly silenced.